Hey folks, I've got stuff on my mind. To be honest, I think that this video is going to be largely just a restatement of points that I've made in past videos, but I'm looking at them a little bit differently now, and I also had this realization that hit me like a ton of bricks because it kind of goes against this idea that I've had in my mind for years. To recap, once upon a time I made a video called Originality is Overrated, in which I basically said it's okay not to stress over this idea of making something totally original. It's kind of like whenever you're developing an art style, it makes a lot of sense to copy a lot of other styles that you like, and it sort of forms your own. Later I made this video called Results, in which I discussed at length the various struggles that I've had with making this game of mine that I've been working on for years, and it still has made less progress than I care to admit. Following that, I made this video called My Center, where I talked about this discovery I had that my work, my creative process, is more emotionally driven than it is logic driven. And despite all the lessons I've learned that I've presented in these videos, I've still had a hard time making actual progress on my game. So what am I missing this time, I thought. Once again, I was asking the question, what is it that made my earlier work so much easier? How did it come so much more naturally than what I'm trying to do now? And since I'm making a video game, once again the question came up of, what is it that I value most in video games? The way I chose to research this was to revise my top 10 favorite games list, except this time I decided to stretch it out to 25 games instead of just 10. And I did not rush it. I put every game next to every other game in sets of 2. When I asked myself which of these 2 games do I like better, I tried to be completely honest with myself, and it ended up taking pretty much an entire day without much of a break. When I stopped asking which of these games should I logically consider the better game, and I started thinking which of these games do I honestly feel better about, the end result was enlightening. At this point in time, my favorite game out of all the games that exist in the world is Donkey Kong 64. I've taken more inspiration from Donkey Kong 64 than I'd ever realized, and in a weird way it encapsulates basically everything that I cherish most in a video game. It has a sense of adventure, growth, scale, it's satisfying, it's full of variety, it has a lot of relaxing atmosphere, but at the same time it has a lot of challenge to it as well. It's goofy, it lets you do so many things in whatever order you want while it still has this feeling of progression, and the soundtrack is fantastic. But the kicker here, I think, perhaps more important than anything else I've mentioned, is that it is so blatantly clear that the developers had a blast making Donkey Kong 64. You can feel all the silly jokes and the ideas that were bounced back and forth between the members of the team, and it's very possible, I would say even likely, that the game they ended up making was not exactly what they set out to make initially. I would like to back up now to that realization I had recently that went against something that's been in my head for years. As I'm guessing all of you know at this point, Riddle School started out as a fan game that I wasn't really intending to make into anything bigger. One Night at Flumpty's was a fan game that was also just an inside joke, and once again I didn't really intend for it to be anything bigger. Both of them did become something bigger, and while I maintain that I don't want to continue either series, I now take back one of my excuses for not wanting to continue them. That excuse was simply I didn't make them with the intent of taking them all that seriously. To stretch them out any longer would just be belaboring something pointless. I always said, look, I've moved on, I'm working on this other game right now that I'm calling Project Comet, and I'm very concerned with the end result. I want the end result to be the kind of game that if I had never played it before, I would play it and it would become my favorite. This is something I'm taking very seriously. You see how this fits into Donkey Kong 64 now? These days it feels like I'm surrounded by games where every little detail matters in some way to some deeper story or deeper meaning, and that kind of puts some pressure on me. I appreciate when a game has so many little details that can be closely analyzed to mean something more significant. And if I somehow found it in myself to craft this story and this world in a video game where everything is deliberate and there are no accidents, there are no coincidences, it's probably a game that someone like me would enjoy. But the games I've had the most success with, and the games that I've made the most progress on in the shortest amount of time, are the games where I wasn't so concerned with some kind of end goal. The purest simplification of my method of artistic expression is something I've taken for granted for far too long, and it can be summed up in 3 words. Just have fun. That's all there is to it. If you're like me, stressing over how great the final product has to be is going to be more of a hindrance than it will be a help. I intend to follow my own advice. For real this time. I need to let myself loose from these shackles that I've put on myself. Almost all of my plans for Project Comet that I've come up with over the years, I am now scrapping. I kinda said this back in the My Center video, but it's to an even greater extent now. I knew I wanted to improvise, and now I know how I want to improvise, with as much freedom and fun as possible. Which means, I'm just gonna take baby steps and dance with each one. If you like this video, then good.